share my screen. There we are. Does that work for everybody? Yeah. Okay, good. So I am Julia Shalet. It's nice to see you all. For those of you who are in Ho Chi Minh City, it's really beautiful. I have been, I'm very excited. I've been there. It was absolutely lovely. And I regret very much not buying some lovely artwork. So it's always with me. I wish I'd have bought that lovely thing. See, you know, take it when it's there, seize it. So I'll just give you a few headlines of what I've done and why I'm sort of here talking with some experience. You can see here I won, Harper's Bazaar is a big sort of magazine, and I worked at a company called WeWorld for a while. I was a product and insights director, and they created little avatars. So for some of you, you might remember when you first started using MSN Messenger, right, that you could make a little avatar of yourself. And this was pre-Facebook. And as part of my role there, I brought them their first £1 million. They were a startup. I made their first million for them in digital downloads. So it was just before Virtual Worlds, and that earned me my top 40 entrepreneurs under 40, which was fun. The next one along was I more recently worked at Pearson, who are an international education company, and sit behind a lot of the qualifications that you take when you're at school and so on. You've probably heard of them. And I was part of a team that run a sort of internal consultancy, and thinking about what Randy talked about, we actually kind of turned them into a more innovative organization. They are heavily print-based, and we moved them more digital. And I trained, I think, 100 coaches, product coaches worldwide, and wrote the manual on how to kind of be more innovative and manage your products through the product life cycle. So that was that one. And then you can see a big newspaper in the UK is called The Guardian. I ran a project to bring an old 1920s market back to life. And it was great because it stretched my definition of product. The market was a product. So I say a product is something you can experience, right? It's a product, service, or experience. And the market was the product. And over a year, it's now, it sort of became, it had lots of empty shop units in it, really beautiful little old units. Within a year it was buzzing, and now when you come to London and you look up, you know, where shall I go, where are the hotspots, it says Brixton Village Market. And that was something that I championed. Lots of great stories on that, and really fun and really different from kind of corporate product, which is initially where I started. And my book has won a few months ago a business book award from the US, so I'm very excited about that. I'll share a bit more on that later. Moving on. So yeah, Randy, I also have a Venn diagram, hurrah! And it's not mine, I borrowed it, but you can see, and you know, what you've asked me to talk about now is about killing products, right? And it feels quite negative, so I say it with a great big smile, okay? Because I'm going to tell you that killing products is a good thing to do, right? But here we are. So I want to know in the chat, for you to think about this as we're talking about it, and to tell me when you last wanted to shout stop. Okay, so you can tell me your stories in the chat. Was it because you were working on something or looking at an idea that you thought wasn't viable, right? So up here, so you thought you couldn't actually make a profit from it. So if anyone has wanted to shout stop because they didn't think they were going to make any money, any profit from the product, just put a V into the chat box. Okay, now what about feasible? All right, so perhaps you thought, there's no way we can deliver this. This is no way do we have the capability to deliver this? Now, obviously feasible often happens, well, can happen for many reasons. It could happen because you simply got no resources, no way we can actually deliver it. Or it might be because if you're doing something quite transformational, perhaps you don't have the capability in the company, right? So I'm interested if anyone can relate to feasibility, put an F into the chat box. Yeah, quite a few coming. And desirability, try, you're ahead of me. What about desirability? You're working on something and you think, nobody wants this, Why would we bother to work on this feature, or this new product or this marketing campaign or whatever it is, or this new business model? No one's going to want this. Wow. And look at this. So I can see more D's at the moment, many times, my Vipal, very times. So I think you're absolutely right. And my work, I guess, is based around the fact that this desirability is actually the biggest reason for wanting to stop most of the time. And it's also the biggest product killer, right, of all time. And that's the one that's really important for us to call out. So I'm showing you our favorite thing in the world as product people, isn't it? Our product life cycle. And there are many different versions of what you can now call the different stages, but I've just picked this one. I'm talking about idea development and breaking it into proposition validation and solution development. But I wanted to tell you a few stories again about how I got the title of the product killer, right? So my first story sits in idea development, and it's a really odd one, and I think that you'll be able to relate to it. So my first job when I came out of university was to work for a mobile operator, and it was 1993, and it was the launch of the first proper consumer mobile in the UK. So what I mean by that is that before this company launched, it was Mercury One-to-One, which was a cable and wireless and US West collaboration. And it has now then moved into being T-Mobile, and now it's EE. Okay, so if any of you know any of the mobile operators. So before this company launched its consumer offering, there were great big business mobile phones. You walked around, hello, these great big phones. And so it was the first real small consumer mobile affordable offering, right? People like, non-business people didn't really have mobiles. And a couple of years into the job, there was a fantastic COO there who was actually Steve Jobs' right-hand man for a while. He's unfortunately not with us any longer, but a wonderful guy. And he knew that I sort of called it and said it as it was. So what had happened was he'd been persuaded by a technology company to buy a whole platform called Unified Messaging. And the idea was that, okay, we're a couple of years in, we were all used to voicemail, and we just about launched text, right? But the idea was, well, how about we buy this £10 million platform, which he did go and buy a lot of money. And it means that it will actually convert voice to text. Okay, so now you say, I'm actually going to freak you out. Alexa, turn off my lights. Right, so maybe your lights are all turning off now, but okay. So now it works really well, okay? But back then it did not work. So he sent me along, he said, go and tell me what you think of this. I've bought it, by the way, but go and tell me what you think of it. And it just didn't work. It was about 1995. It's not going to work then. It took till now to get this technology working really well. But not only didn't it work, but isn't this classic of technology sort of leading the way for innovation, right? Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. So I was brave enough to stand up to this guy after he'd spent £10 million of the company money and say, don't do it. It really doesn't work. But the point was, he hadn't even thought about whether anyone wanted it or needed it. At that point, as I say, it would have been very niche because even the hardware wasn't there, wasn't ready for us to start barking commands at anything, So pretty interesting. So that was my big product killer moment. But the wrong way round, right? We really ought to be doing desirability first. And another example I've got more recently is a product that's very much in sort of growth, almost in maturity, working for an education company. They started looking at, do we want to do a new mobile app to help with a particular subject, to help people study, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds study and practice vocabulary for a particular language lesson. And I went out and did the research for them and found that, my goodness, the things that were already out in the market was so fantastic. And there was really no point entering the market. There was no space in the market at all. So kill the idea. It was at an early stage. It was over here in the sort of growth maturity area. but no, let's not do that. Okay, so really, really good to not waste your effort, waste your time and money. Something also that Randy spoke about. So I'm very much an anti-waste person, right? And killing stops you from wasting your time. And another great example from decline, actually. So back at the mobile operator, around about 96, 97, there was a product called fax messaging, right? Do you remember faxes? Do you remember faxes? Yeah. So the idea with this fax messaging product was that you'd be a sort of a salesman, perhaps you'd be out on the road, and it was mobile fax, right? So you weren't at your home, so you're out on the road, you needed to get a fax, and you could get a fax sent to your mobile phone, and you then ran into a petrol station and were able somehow to print out the fax at the petrol station, right? Or with anyone who had a fax machine, so you could then connect it up. I was saying, look, this is making us, £20,000 a year. The profit margin is incredibly low because it costs us, some people are young enough to not know what a fax machine is, okay, but it's costing us more to actually run the product than we're making, right? So it's a real leveler. And the management said, the board said, you can't kill it because, of course, the people using it are high value business customers. So there might not be many people using it, but they're very high value. And of course, what did I do? I went and found 5 of those people and had a chat with them, right? Which is what everything I talk about, and said, cool, what do you think? What would happen if I took fax away? They said, oh, we don't even use it. Don't worry about it. We wouldn't notice it. We find another way to do it. Don't worry. Obviously, the board were very worried that they would just leave and go to another service, but it didn't happen. So here's a great story of releasing resource, right? So I could take all those people who were working on fax machines and say, actually, we've got picture messaging coming up around the corner. Should we go and work on that instead? And we've got some other ideas. So, death is not a bad thing at all. It's taking of resources and pumping them into something that's actually going to be more fruitful, right? So here we are. The main reason products fail, and I come back to this idea of desirability, right, is because somebody is making assumptions about how people feel and what they want and how they will behave, okay? So we're not questioning whether people really want the product. And I pose this to you, sound still haunts my dreams. Abdo, I love that, Yeah, still popular in Japan. Okay, maybe they should have it. I should have given the product to them. Okay, so what I want to ask you is to look yourself, have a good look in the mirror, right? Are you working on something and assuming it's something that people want? Are you assuming they're going to behave a particular way? And it's a real kind of leveler. And I just quote this from my book, as you probably expect me to. But this is about anti-waste, right? So let's not throw good money after bad. Even the costs, even once you've built the product, if you're working on something that's being built at the moment, you've still got all the costs of marketing it and maintaining it, right? Which is hugely expensive. So I think, people should be really brave about stopping. And so it's a mindset as well that we must make decisions based on evidence, not gut, right? We've got to find evidence. So what I would say to you is, if you're thinking you've got something and you're thinking, really, we really should be questioning this, what I would do is put it to a 7-step test that I'm going to give you. And it does also, like Randy, involve talking to some customers and carrying out some very structured interviews. But where you start, and this is always trips people up, is state it as a positive testable hypothesis. So you don't want to say, we believe that people don't want this, right? Because it's very difficult to test that way. You put it the other way around. So let's say in this example, you feel that introducing a new chatbot is not going to be a good idea, let's just say. But you write it as a positive. We believe that if we introduce a new chatbot on our customer services website page, we will reduce our costs by 20% in a year without reducing customer satisfaction scores. And the bit that you're worried about is actually satisfaction, probably. All right, so you probably know it could reduce costs, but actually overall, is it going to do damage to the business? So you write it positively. and then you're going to pump it through my 7-step test. So this test is all about getting evidence, making decisions, and moving forward. It is 7 steps. Now, the 7 steps in themselves, you can see this is the normal kind of process you would go through if you were going to carry out some customer interviews. There's nothing too earth-shattering about it, okay? It does insist that you follow an order, right? So first you write this hypothesis that's testable. Then you look at the biggest risks in the hypothesis, okay? What are the things you really need evidence on? Where don't you have evidence? Then you create questions that you need answering, and you work out who you're going to interview by finding your interviewees. And you set some measures and targets so you know how to score the answers that you get. And then you go and conduct the interviews themselves, and then you make your decision. Do I stop, right? Do I make some changes and carry on, or do I carry on as is? And you can flip this, as I said. So the thing that trips people up is within each one of these steps, and we don't have time to go through it now, is there are many mistakes and pitfalls, right? So what I've done is I've tried to highlight them and indicate them. And if you follow this process, and you may find yourself iterating and going backwards and forwards a bit, because you go forward and think, that hypothesis needs changing, and you go back again, right? You may find yourself iterating as every good product person would. But basically, it's the things that can trip you up as you go through. I talk very much about eye to eye, not about surveys, because this is about emotion. In this case, about customer satisfaction. That's emotion. Like, how annoyed would you be? How frustrated would you be? How much do you value talking to somebody? That's an emotional thing. It's feelings. And I also think that you want to have a conversation when you look at people's expressions, say, oh, you look a bit worried about that. Do you want to tell me more? There's very many reasons to do these face-to-face interviews, and video is great. We're brilliant at it, all of us now. Look at us now. No, look at us now. We're brilliant at video. And start with just 5. Okay, so recruit them carefully. And again, there are things that will trip you up in who you speak to. Make sure you have the right mix of people and so on. But just start with 5. It doesn't have to be a great wholesale research. This is DIY research for product people. This isn't full-on market research, right? And the big thing is to stay as neutral. And again, that's the biggest thing that can trip you up. So through every step, there's ways to remove your own bias, right? Because you're going to want to hear a particular answer. You're quite convinced you want to prove that you're right. But you've got to be very careful about this, and lots of tips on that. And always get people to give you real evidence. So in the example of a chatbot, you'd ask them about their experience with other chatbots, right? That's what you do. You'd ask them for their real experience. You wouldn't ask them for a hypothetical example. How would you feel if? You'd say, tell me the last time you used a chatbot. So again, all of these tips and tricks within the 7 steps. So I'd like to welcome you to the Product Killers Club, right? And invite you to really question some of the things you're doing and put the resource into things that really are going to pay off, okay? So this is my book, and it is available on Amazon as a paperback or an ebook. As Anne said, I am happy to offer a free copy of the book. So thinking about it, probably the best way to do it, and I'll ship it all the way from North London. How about that? How about that? So I've got my envelopes ready. So I think probably the best thing to do is to connect with me on LinkedIn and then message me. And what I'll do is in this time tomorrow, I'll pull the names out of a hat, and I'll get in touch with you and get your address for the person who wins. Is that a good way of doing it? Probably. Let's use it, what we've got. And that is it. So questions. Shall I stop sharing and take any questions? I am Shalet, so you'll find me easily on LinkedIn. I was very grateful to my parents for giving me a unique name. So there we are.
Thank you very much, Julia. We already have few questions in the chat. For this presentation, I encourage everybody to go on Amazon to get the book. We were looking to if we have it somewhere in the bookstores. Unfortunately, the paperback is not in Vietnam, so you can order it as an EPUB online, or write to Julia. She will pick the lucky one tomorrow. Okay, questions. First, I saw interesting questions from Abdel. How do you train people not to be emotionally invested in the stuff they build, that making the killing become an easy option?
That's great, isn't it?
Not them, the product.
Yeah. So if you're talking about how do you train yourself or other people, I suppose it's other people in this case. But evidence and data is a wonderful thing, right? The minute you have data and as it's evidence, and it can be objectivized, right? So you can say, but the stats say that this thing isn't being used, or that's hard data. You've pulled it from your systems. It's not being used. Or I've spoken to, I started with 5 and then I went to another 5, another 5. I've spoken to 3 segments, and out of 15 people, 12 of them aren't using this at all, or 12 of them have had a really bad experience with this elsewhere. It's data, right? It takes the emotion out of it. And you can, say to people also, hand on heart, can you tell me you really can sleep easy at night knowing that we're putting all of this investment, it's costing us this much. Again, it's money, isn't it? It's data, it's evidence. It's costing us this much to maintain this thing when we could be doing something over here. And the big thing, a big fear of killing, of course, is that people think that their job might disappear if it's their product, right? So if you really want to do a nice job of this, what you do is you go to your product roadmap, right? And you say, there's this thing over here, this is up next. Why don't we work on this now? Yeah. And put them onto it, because certainly if you're in a management position, that's the worst thing. But think about it. If you've got one of those products, perhaps it's up to you to say, I could be working on this. Yeah. Some of the functionality that supports this product, actually, it's a nice transition over here. You see what I mean? So there are many ways to do it.
Yes, data. That's important. Second question, which I've collected before, is in your book, you advocate for the 7-step process in validating ideas. Have you received any feedback from other product managers on which steps cause them the most trouble? Do you have any thoughts on how they could overcome those ones?
Right, that's a huge question. Absolutely huge. So the book that I've written is from certainly the last 15 years, very concentrated experience, helping other people test out their ideas. So the book was written because of the difficulties they have. So it's not only based on work I've done to test out products and ideas that I've brought to market, but also in training and helping other people to do the same. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been through what's now turned out to be this process, right? So let me think. I would say the worst mistake is making it up front, right? Is in step 1. It's in writing your hypothesis, right? The biggest mistake people make is they don't realize that the most riskiest bit is whether people need or want what they've got. So I have a kind of 3 points that I make very, very clearly, and to structure the customer interviews around. And the first one is, does the problem exist? Okay, you think there's a problem, but does it actually exist? Isn't it classic? I meet so many founders who, have experienced a problem themselves. So they've decided to go and solve it. No one else had the problem, or not enough people. So does the problem exist? Secondly, is there a place in the market? Is there space in the market, right? So are there other people, just like the example I gave earlier with the education app, the mobile app, is there a space in the market, or are the solutions already good enough? Are they already existing? There's no space in the market for you. And thirdly, and this is a real big one, is the customer or the user prepared to take the action that you need them to, right? So if, let's say, you're selling B2B, right, business to business, with a business, if they're trying to implement something, it's usually people, system, process, right? So they've got to retrain their people to do something differently. Let's say you've developed a business tool. they've got to train their people, they've got to change their processes, and they've potentially got to integrate your thing with their systems, right? Are they prepared to do that to get the benefit that you're trying to offer? And it's that based on real evidence. So you don't go in with a hypothetical saying, hey, we've got this thing, do you fancy doing this? You know, you say, when's the last time you made a change and bought a business tool that affected your people system process? Tell me about that, right? So there are many, many big mistakes that people make, but I would say those are the three biggest ones. And that's why I suggest a research script that's aligned against those biggest risks. Plenty more throughout, but that's probably my favorite one.
Thank you very much. One more question, which will be more about the MVPs or the starting products. How about if we don't have much evidence and we need to make a decision? I mean, the customer collection or the data is so small that actually we don't have clear answer from the data.
Okay, so first of all, let's just talk about risk and say you will never, ever, ever, ever be risk-free, right? So you're getting married, right? Do you promise to take this person for the rest of your life? Okay, I'll have a go, but it's never risk-free, okay? You never quite know what's going to happen. So you will never have zero risk. Can you find a point where you're comfortable enough? Okay, so is it 70% comfortable? It's certainly not waking up in the middle of the night going, oh my goodness me, what am I doing with this, right? That's not what you want. So there comes a point where you have to have a kind of emotional sensibility about it. But what I would say is it's very common. You can gather more evidence than you think. All right. And I call this parallels, right? You need to find parallels. So just like I was saying with the people system process in the business, you want to find something similar. It might be in a parallel example that people have done that gives you the evidence that they're prepared to do the thing you want. Okay. And I also argue, it's a nice one, but I argue that there's no such thing as something completely new. There's only better ways to do something you already do, right? So people could say the aeroplane was completely new, right? It was a new thing, but it wasn't. People were traveling from A to B. This just gave them a better way to do it, better, faster, you know, more comfortable, etc. Okay, so I will argue that there are parallels and similars all over the place for you to get evidence. I'm really happy to talk to anyone more about that because it works much better if I can explain it in context rather than in theory. But I believe that there are places you can get evidence that you didn't actually think of.